Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Today we're going to talk about Australopithecus and some controversy surrounding what may be a new species of early human. This unrecognized hominin species is called Littlefoot. You guys may have heard of it, and was actually discovered back in the 90s. And since then, a lot has been going on in terms of basically questioning the origin of this surprisingly intact skeleton. But before we get into that, I want to talk about Australopithecus very briefly, if you guys aren't sure. Here's a map of East Africa, or Africa rather, and then about 4 million years ago, this species started showing up, this proto-human. You guys have probably heard of Lucy. Lucy is a very famous Australopithecus, but anyway, you guys see this A. This A stands for Australopithecine, and then the specific species of that genus. And this Australopithecus is basically the precursor to the genus Homo, which bore us and a bunch of other, like Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and all that good stuff. Here are the fossil sites, like I said earlier, and these date to about 4 million. So the oldest one started appearing about 4 million, and then the last ones died out around 2 million years ago. And then from there, we had the rise of the early Homo genus, like I said earlier. This aforementioned skull, Littlefoot, allegedly belongs to this group. But another guy thinks that it might be it should be the first of its own species, basically. They found, after analyzing the evidence, that the species was evolving to become better at striding on two legs. And the reason why they think that is because the legs are longer than the arms. Whereas before this genus, they were typically known to have longer arms and legs. So that's basically the first and probably most important aspect of this argument, saying that this is its own species. Lucy, like I mentioned earlier, she is Australopithecus afarensis, which is one of the species, but there are several other ones that were living in Africa around 2 million years ago before they died out. Africanus is another one. But then there's some controversy over who should have access to the fossil. Ronald Clark is the central figure who, from the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa. He was going through a bunch of bones in this cave, the Sterkfontein cave in South Africa. In 94, he found 4-foot bones, thought they were peculiar, and decided to look further into them. And then he returned 3 years later in 97 with 2 colleagues, and they found more of the same skeleton in the same cave within the same rock. So they started excavating it, which took over 10 years because, when we're talking about million-plus-year-old bones, if you touch it, it'll turn to dust. He painstakingly, personally used an air scribe, basically a pressurized, like a little pistol-like instrument that shoots pressurized air, and he removed the bones from the rock using just that, which in and of itself requires a huge amount of patience, skill, knowledge, instincts. So right away, this guy gets my respect. He even says so himself. I've spent 20 years getting this skeleton, finding it in the rock in the deep darkness of the cave, locating every bone, and then cleaning it sufficiently so we could identify them in the cave, undercutting them, bringing them out in blocks, cleaning them, reconstructing them. So after he was done, he basically had a complete skeleton that is ready to be discussed, analyzed, and written about. The skeleton itself was an elderly female, about 130 centimeters in height. She had an arm injury that she was probably dealing with her whole life. It's the first fossil of this age, 2 million plus years, to have been discovered with its limbs fully intact. So because of how complete the skeleton is, Clark feels that he should be the first one to publish any written documentation on it. Whereas other parts of the scientific community, they don't necessarily agree with him, but they allow him to print what he wants anyway. Well, we'll get into that in a second. So, like I said earlier, the hominin had longer lower limbs and upper limbs. It was being selected for stride length in bipedalism, whereas the older hominin, Ardipithecus, which came before Australopithecus, is a whole nother genus, had longer arms and legs, so they resembled more like great apes. So we kind of see this. It's not the missing link, but we can see this this divergence from the older body type, so to speak. Because of this, Littlefoot would have been good at carrying objects, or not as good as carrying objects, but better at climbing trees, which suited her home, which was the tropical rainforest. So that makes a lot of sense, right? The environment has a huge effect on how your body type over the course of millennia shapes itself. The conclusion is that the fossil is 3.67 million years old, so way older than they thought it was, and right at close to that 4 million year mark where the species was supposed to have been adventing, coming out. So these dates, by the way, are so old that it's really hard to wrap your head around it. Again, to put in perspective, we are Homo sapiens sapiens is supposedly 300 million to 200, or 300,000 to 200,000 years old, depending on who you ask. Around there, some people think it's older. Neanderthals are about 450,000 or to 700,000, depending on who you ask. So the dates are all, again, depending on who you ask, the dates are everywhere. So this is how unrefined our conclusions are in this field, which is deservedly so, gets a lot of criticism from scientists from all different disciplines. That's why a lot of people throw each other under the bus when it comes to discovering a new species of hominin like this, is because there's a lot of guesswork involved. That's probably the number one criticism. But that doesn't change the fact that they have a fully intact skeleton of this bizarre looking humanoid that it really exists. So the fact is that people need to get over their biases and just look at the hard data, which it seems like a lot of scientists want to do. So anyway, so Clark, for over a decade, he's been arguing, okay, this is a whole new species. We can't just throw the Australopithecus blanket over it, although they do because it comes from that time period. But it's not A. afarensis. It's not the same type that Lucy was. So he called it A. Prometheus, which was a term coined by Raymond Dart in 1948. He coined the term because it was the first Australopithecus specimen in 1925, but then later on it just fell out of use. So Clark brought that back to label this new 3.67 million year old, allegedly 3.67 million year old skeleton as its own species. So he's trying to push that. So, and partly because he's convinced that many of the bones from that cave, Sterkfontein Cave, are not A. africanus. So he thinks a lot of people in the community, that a lot of other anthropologists, paleontologists, archaeologists are mistaken. So the reason why he thinks this is because there's a lot of differences in the skull, the rest of the skeleton, larger teeth, a big gap between the upper canines and incisors. So there's a lot of details that he uses to back up his claim that this is not your run-of-the-mill Australopithecus africanus. Another detail he points out is Littlefoot's diet. Based on her teeth, she ate almost nothing but plants, whereas Africanus was more omnivorous, so they also incorporated meat into their diet. A lot of this new data sounds great, but it's been overshadowed by some dispute at the University of Witwatersrand. So, first of all, Clark was adamant that he wanted to publish first over his colleague Lee Berger, who was the guy who discovered A. sediba and Homo naledi. I think I did a video on Homo naledi a long time ago, like 3 months ago or so. They found the skeleton in a pit in South Africa, and they found out that it was from the genus Homo because it was like 250,000 years old or something like that. They were surprised because it was so young. this is the guy who discovered that species. There's a lot of drama here, but in 2016, they applied to a university committee to ask for a look at Littlefoot. This is Berger's team, but Clark did not want to give Berger access before his studies were published because he thinks that Berger has been attempting to take this over. Berger's denying the little back and forth. Basically, in a nutshell, Clark thinks, hey, I found it. I painstakingly did all this excavation by myself for over 10 years. I feel like I'm the expert in this. I'm going to go ahead and publish this before peer review was finished. So that was November 30th, 2018. The university allowed him time to publish it first. It was published in the Journal of Human Evolution. And then there are 3 other papers that the Journal of Human Evolution has accepted, but then they are not online yet. I don't know who's right here. I really don't have a dog in this fight, but it seems like Clark does have a good point because he figured this out. He did the legwork, but it doesn't discount Berger's expertise in the field as well and his opinion. And I would want everyone to put their opinion on there. So I don't know. I don't know if this is like an ego thing or just a principle thing, but I just wish they would just get over it and just try to get the most truth out of this skeleton, which is like a trove of information. It might as well be a box of documents, this skeleton that has all this information about not only genetic information, but just like the proportions are weird. There's nothing like it. So why don't we just get over all this and just study the skeleton itself? It seems like these two guys have a history between each other. Most paleontologists have disputes with each other about whether this proposed Prometheus is real, which is all the reason more to hurry up and publish papers on this, because otherwise it's just going to be a whole murky cloud of hearsay and unproven ad hominem attacks maybe, and it's just not good. It's not good for the scientific community to just say a bunch of stuff but not hold their claims to the fire of criticism. They even have a dispute about the name Prometheus. I don't think that's a big deal. Whatever, call it whatever you want. Just get the information from the skeleton, please. Littlefoot might belong to a new species, but it's not possible to judge on what has been published so far. What I am not seeing in these papers is the data. He says now the fossil is available for other researchers to examine. Littlefoot would become a crucial fossil, blah, blah, blah. Berger would not comment on whether he thinks Littlefoot belongs to a new species. Okay, so I don't know. I think this is much to do about reputation. A lot of problems in academia where people are hoarding data or something. I don't know. Some people think that this is faked, that all this is just some stunt to garner attention and resources on the part of Clark. I don't know. I don't think so. I think a lot of those are just unfound claims. The fact of the matter is that Littlefoot exists, and there's probably more like it. It raises a huge question as to how far back do these hominins go? Are they really from apes? Are they concurrent with the great apes? How smart were they? There's a lot of questions here that are just not being addressed. So let me know what you guys think about Australopithecus, this early human ancestor, Littlefoot, Lucy. Did they really rise in East Africa, or did they come from somewhere else? Did they have a language? About the state of academia where this is an issue, Clark versus Berger, all this stuff. Let me know in the comments, and I'll get back to you guys tomorrow.